Are any of you a little bit scared by poetry? When you hear poetry, what sort of words come into your mind?
Yes, come.
It feels more like calm. It feels calm.
You feel calm. That's great. That's the mood that we should all be in, because this is really going to be poetry made easy. And I don't think that poetry was ever very hard in the first place. So calm is the kind of word that we want to hear, definitely. But I will tell you that how I got started with poetry, I was not, born with this amazing desire to want to write poetry. It had to take some convincing. Actually, to be more specific, my mom sort of bribed me to start writing poetry. I was a huge reader. I loved reading poetry. I would just devour books by Shel Silverstein and Jack Paletsky. I really liked funny poems. Anything that rhymed too is good. So I would buy all these stacks of poetry books, and my mom, I think, was getting a little tired of buying so many books for me and not seeing any poetry being written by me, so she said, "Hey Adora, here's the deal. I will buy you unlimited amounts of poetry books for as long as you want, as long as you try writing poetry. Just write a couple of poems and see how you like it." Well, that couple of poems to see how you like it turned into a lot of poems, and so I was able to publish my poetry collection, Dancing Fingers. So I know how you feel if you're not sure about whether you like poetry or not. It took a bribe to get me started, but I'm hoping that we can grow to love poetry with a little bit of practice. This is my second book, actually, Dancing Fingers, and then my first book, Flying Fingers, is a collection of short stories and tips on writing. So you can tell that I really love to write and read. So I'm going to be moving through a slide here. The first thing is what poetry means. According to the dictionary, poetry is literature in verse, literary works written in verse, in particular verse writing of high quality, great beauty, emotional sincerity or intensity, or profound insight. Now personally, I think that that's a pretty hard definition to understand just from looking at it. Does anyone want to kind of look at that and tell me, what do you think? And there's really no right or wrong here. What do you think that this definition is basically saying that poetry is?
What do you think all those words are saying in like kid language? Let's do it that way. Anybody want to take a shot? Yes.
Sad.
You think it's sad? Well, can you, Caitlin, try up front?
It has a strong meaning.
It has a strong meaning. Lucas?
Is it funny?
It could be funny. Right, so I'm going to start writing a couple of these definitions that we see from this. So we see sad, strong meaning, funny. So you can tell that we have sad and we have funny in the same summary. So that means that poetry has quite a bit of variation. And this definition definitely gives a bit of wiggle room, doesn't it? Because it says literary works written in verse. So when you think about how poetry looks, that's verse, how it's written. In particular, verse writing. So it's just saying it's in verse and it's really good. Now, that's not super specific, is it? Because when you look at something like high quality, great beauty, emotional sincerity or intensity, or profound insight, that's saying things like good, beautiful, sincere or intense, so the emotions are really clear in there, or profound insight. It's sharing some new piece of wisdom, new piece of knowledge. Look at the or here. That means that it could be any one of these. And another great thing is that it's really up to you to decide what poetry is, because these things of quality, beauty, intensity, they're all very subjective. That means that different people will have a different idea of what it is. So if you're ever scared of poetry because you worry, well, it won't be good, the great thing is that this is a definition with a lot of wiggle room, and it's really up to you, your readers, to decide this is poetry or not. So that's the dictionary definition of poetry. Now, a poem can be a lot more than that. You can do a great amount with a poem. Does anyone want to give an example of a poem that they like?
Poem that you like, that you know?
Does anyone have a favorite poem? Yeah, that would be great. This might be a bit of a challenge if you can remember the name of a favorite poem. Okay.
Matt, you want to try it?
In the summer,
Summer?
In the summer.
Oh, in the summer, great. And so, why do you like that poem? Do you want to tell us about it?
Well, it tells like the summer and well, it's like tells about the sun and water and beach.
Are you able to hear me, Dora?
It tells about the sun and the beach. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, kind of summary kind of stuff.
Okay. So in the summer, great, sounds like a wonderful poem, tells about the sun, tells about the beach, really makes that image. And I think that when we think about our favorite poems, or if you go home and you pick up a book of poetry from the library or whatever, look for a poem that you really like and try to pick out the reasons that you like it so that you can put that to work when you're writing your own poem. The great thing is that with poetry, you can show your reader an image, like of summer, you can tell a story, you can do so much with just a few words. It can be however long or short you want it to be. You can have a 2-line poem. I once wrote a poem that just goes like this. Pum-dee-dee-dum goes the drum. Some tap their feet and hum. It was just 2 lines. Now, you might say that that's a very, very short poem, but they're really fun to write. They're called couplets. You can also have really epic poems. There are poems that span hundreds of pages. Raise your hand if you've ever been stuck when you're trying to think of ideas. Has anyone ever had one of those writer's block moments? Yep, pretty much everyone has. If you've never ever been stuck trying to think of ideas, I'm suspicious as to whether you're a robot. To help us think about topics for poetry, we're going to be looking at some possible inspirations. Where can we get these ideas? Now, history is a really great inspiration for poetry. You can learn so much from all the things that have happened before. But when I say history, I don't just mean medieval Europe or stuff that happened a really, really long time ago. History could be as long ago as yesterday or what's happening in the news. So, poetry tip number 1, look back. We're going to be talking about writing some poems inspired by olden times. Let me quickly switch over to Now, I'm not going to read this entire definition. I think we've had a lot of definitions already, but history is what has happened, past events, background, the past. What does history mean to you?
What do you got?
Looking back, like on what happened, like that what people did or what you basically did yesterday.
Definitely, looking back on what has happened. Anyone else?
Something that happened, something in the past, like something that happened before the second that you're in right now.
Yeah, exactly. It could be something like, if I walk over here and now I'm going to walk back, maybe me doing that is history. Actually, that is history, because history is just everything in the past, and the past is continually updating. So, something you did a second ago. That's definitely a great way to think about it. What else? What is an image that comes to mind? What words come to mind? You can just throw anything out.
An event that happened that isn't happening anymore.
An event that happened
Well, an event that happened, that's all.
Okay, an event that happened. Any more ideas?
Like, it makes me feel like, let's say, back to time of George Washington.
Okay, George Washington. Definitely. And let's get one more.
Robert?
History to me is kind of like interesting facts that
Interesting facts, and there are a lot of those for sure. So when we think of history, we think of looking back, we think of things we did a second ago. We think of an event that happened that's over now. We think of George Washington and interesting facts. So this is a lot of different places that we can get ideas from. History is a lot more than just dates and time and dead presidents. History is everything that has ever happened to anyone or everyone who has ever lived. There's a lot of evers in that sense. So history is very inclusive. It's pretty much everything. History is all the songs that have ever been sung and all the paintings that have ever been painted. And history includes your family too. Raise your hands if you ever asked your grandparents or an elder who you know, so maybe you've gone to like a senior center and maybe you've asked some grown-ups about their childhood. Have you asked grown-ups about their childhood? I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. It's really enjoyable for me to hear my dad talk about how prices of things used to be so cheap, and he would always go on and on about, how much food prices are different now and stuff like that. And it's always very entertaining to hear about what life was like in the 1960s and 70s, in the 1950s from my grandparents. So history includes your family too. Make sure to make use of that resource. Now what about you? You might not think of it this way. You might think, well, my parents, my grandparents, they've really seen all the cool history happening, but we've been witnesses to history too. How have we been witnesses to history? What kind of history have you seen happening?
Good.
Well, I've seen us eating lunch, learning about math, history, and all the stuff that's,
So that's your personal history. Great. So you're talking about your day. You have your school day to look back on. What about some historical events? So when your parents or grandparents or an elder relative is telling you, oh, well, when I was growing up, we heard about Pearl Harbor on the radio, or we saw schools being integrated in the American South on TV, or something like that. We've all witnessed historical events taking place. So what are some big historical events that you've witnessed?
Hannah?
earthquake in Japan.
The earthquake in Japan, exactly. We were all watching on our TV. Maybe some of you even saw the breaking news, although I think it was pretty late at night. And we were all in some ways witnesses to history. Even though we might have been following it on our TVs or through the news, we were all seeing it. What are some other historical events you've witnessed?
Hurricane Irene.
Hurricane Irene, definitely. And you guys were a lot closer to it than I was over here in Seattle, for sure. So you have a lot to draw on. And one more historical event you've witnessed? I'm sorry?
I think we forgot. Let's see, wait.
The tsunami.
The tsunami in Japan? Yeah, definitely. So we've seen natural disasters. We've heard about things on the news that are really huge or important. Think about yourself as a witness to history as you go through life and you hear all these news items, and suddenly you have a lot of inspiration to draw on. Ask your relatives about history they've lived. If you didn't raise your hand, if you've never asked an elder relative or someone you know about their childhood, then you definitely should. That's a huge source to draw on. Here's tip number 1 for your poetry inspiration: look to history. It's very simple. You have some great ideas, great base of knowledge. You're all learning about history every day in school, so you can really pull on that and use that to write poems. You can choose from thousands of interesting characters. Who are some really awesome people you know of in history that are just really interesting or have done great things?
Historical people, right there.
Some of the presidents.
Well, why don't we name one?
Abraham Lincoln, great. So you could write a poem all about Abraham Lincoln, or Honest Abe, or whatever name you kind of use, and maybe about his top hat or about the great things he did. You could tell a story about Abraham Lincoln through a poem. You could write a poem that's a little more abstract, maybe some of the words you think of. There's a very famous poem, I believe, about Abraham Lincoln. So, what are some other interesting characters?
Anthony.
Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison, great, inventor of the light bulb, definitely a lot of material there. The really funny example of poem you could write for Thomas Edison is you could write a poem called Dear Thomas Edison. Like, Dear Thomas Edison, thank you very much for, okay, thank you very much for inventing the light bulb is a funny way to start. But then you could say, thank you for inventing the light bulb because without it I wouldn't be able to do my homework late at night, and then write a list of all the other things, maybe you could make it funny. And so that's just a poem I thought of, right? You can come up with ideas on the spur of the moment like that. One more really interesting character from history.
Ashley.
Paul Revere.
Paul Revere, definitely. And there's that famous poem, Paul Revere's Ride, that actually helped make him famous. So poems can take someone who wasn't very famous before it was written, and that poem, Paul Revere's Ride, actually helped transform how we see him in history. So it's pretty incredible to see the role poems have played in history. Great. Paul Revere, Thomas Edison, Abraham Lincoln. See how many interesting characters there are to write about? Now, the thing is, you don't necessarily have to pick the good guys either. You could write poems about evil pirates, or I think of a poem I wrote about Blackbeard, for instance. It was all about how Blackbeard was sailing around the world, and I don't know how much of it was very historically accurate, but you can definitely draw on pirates and knights fighting each other in medieval Europe, whatever you want to do. When you write poems inspired by history, you can add your own creative touches. The thing to remember is that a poem about history isn't the same as a report about history or a research paper. A poem about history is something where you bring a character or you bring an event really to life. So that means if you want to, you can add details about what this, maybe you're writing about a duel between two knights at a medieval castle. And perhaps it's an actual event that happened, or maybe it's an event that is inspired by what you know about history. The difference is that, let's say I decide to write about two knights and they're fighting, it might not be something that actually took place. I might be inventing the names, I might be inventing sort of what's going on, but it's my idea of a historical poem. So your historical poems could also be very factual. You could make sure that every line is accurate. And I think either way is okay, because the important thing to remember is that in poetry you have a lot of license. Basically, you get to do what you want. You can imagine how people from history might have acted, talked, or even smelled. If you've ever watched a movie which is a historical movie, so for instance, if any of you have seen one of the classic novels being brought to life in a movie, you know that the movie director is taking a lot of license. They wouldn't know necessarily how people would have acted. They're not doing a documentary. They're really putting their own creative touches on it. So you can do that. You can imagine. History is definitely a renewable source of poetry and that inspiration. You can keep on going back and back. And you don't have to focus on famous people. You could imagine what it would be like to live in Victorian England if you were a chimney sweep or a beggar. Historical poems allow you to experiment with different styles. So here are some things that you can definitely do on your own time is think of a famous character, an intriguing person, or an event from history, like who you learned about in class, research them, go to the library, and find resources about them. Write down interesting details, adjectives that describe them, and then write a poem. But what we're going to do right now is something a little different. I'm going to head on back to the main poetry presentation, and we're going to start thinking about how we might write a poem together. So think of some ideas, start those wheels turning in your head about poetry. But I want to quickly also say, history is not our only source of inspiration as well. You can get poetry inspirations from really everything, from the outdoors to your pets. Who here has pets? Seeing a lot of raised hands. Wow, I wish I could raise my hand. I don't have any pets. My sister really wants to get a rat, but I think my family was pretty firm against that. They're supposed to be very cute, apparently. I know, I heard a rat and I was like, aren't you supposed to get those out of your house? So, poetry inspirations from animals are incredibly all over the place, right? Any of you have pets? If they do funny things, you can write about them in a poem. I know that you might be getting a little tired of me saying you can turn everything into a poem, but it's really true. If I wanted to, I could pretty much grab anything and turn it into a poem. I could, grab this globe here and look at this and write a poem about the color blue and how it represents the ocean and the sky. Yeah, okay, so you see, I really love turning into poems. Let me quickly switch. Here we go. Sorry, otherwise it shows that browser slide. Here's a quick, I want to quickly read you my poem, Cow, which is an example of something you might write inspired by an animal. I have a most annoying cow who lazes in the sun. She torments every hen and sow and has a lot of fun. She gives no milk at all and moos away at night. Even when she's in her stall, she always picks a fight. Eventually she ran away, freedom her great allure. Away, away from her stall and hay, but she left a great deal of manure. That's a poem about cows that I wrote, and it was just intended to be a quick and humorous little poem about a cow. Animals are great inspiration for poetry. You probably won't run out anytime soon. And then tapping into your personal experience is a source of inspiration for poetry. So I remember one of you said that you had lunch and you had math and history. Take that personal experience, everything that you remember about the day, what is it that you tell your parents when you get home that happened in school, the interesting tidbits, turn them into poems. So now, I know the image of fireworks seems a little strange, but it's because we are going to be writing our own poem, and I think that that's a pretty dramatic moment. So, pretty dramatic moment, what do you think? Well, we're all going to be writing it together. So, I'm going to open a Word document, and what are some of your ideas? What are the ideas you've come up with? Let's have a brainstorming session here.
Brainstorming for a poem. In the back, loudly.
Rabbits.
Rabbits. You want to write about rabbits, okay? So I'm going to put that down on the board here. Let me, sorry. Okay, you can go on. So we have rabbits. What else?
Ashley?
Talking animals.
Talking animals. All right, what else?
Tyler?
Two devil chickens fighting.
I'm sorry?
Two devil chickens fighting.
Wow, that is some impressive sounding. I have no idea what that is, but
Well, no, it's two devil chickens fighting.
oh, I see. Okay, I heard spiders. Sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks. All right. So
Cynthia?
Dog.
What?
Dog.
a duck.
Well,
All right, why don't we, so we have 4 animal ideas right now. Why don't we try to get some other ideas? So personal experiences, history, anything else?
Going to the supermarket.
Going to the supermarket, all right. So you could definitely turn something, the great thing about poetry is that it lets you turn something ordinary, something that most of us might do every week or even every day, and you can turn that into something that's very interesting, suspenseful. So going to the supermarket, anything else, personal experience or history?
Dogs.
well, we have animals. You want to go someplace besides Hannah?
Right.
Well, she said sports. I'm not sure if
Sports.
are we
Okay,
looking
so
for more personal.
how about, so here's the thing, we're getting lots of good ideas, so what we want to make sure is that it's something, first, that is manageable to write in something that's not much longer than a page, right? This poem isn't going to be an epic, book-long poem. So let's try to be pretty specific with your ideas. So instead of saying history, you might say Abraham Lincoln, for instance.
Great.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Leonardo da Vinci, great. Why don't we get 2 more ideas?
Misfits.
Louder.
Instruments.
Instruments. All right. So do you have any specific ones in mind, or just all the instruments?
A specific one, huh?
Piano.
Piano. Okay. Great.
Brooke?
A wiggly tooth.
Wiggly tooth.
A wiggly tooth. Nice. And our last idea. One more idea.
Giovanni?
Forest.
Sorry.
Rainforest.
The rainforest. Great.
Thank you.
So let's review our list of ideas quickly. We have rabbits, talking animals, 2 devil chickens fighting, doves, going to the supermarket, sports, Leonardo da Vinci, instruments, piano, a wiggly tooth, the rainforest. All right. So this is quite a lot. I don't want to go through every single one to go to them. How about we can categorize them? So rabbits, talking animals, the devil chickens, doves are all one section. So these are all animals. And so raise your hand. So our two categories we're going to be voting on first are animals and history and objects. So raise your hand if you want to write something about one of the animal ones.
Okay.
Okay. Now raise your hand if you want to write something, a poem about one of our history / personal experience ones. So sports, Leonardo da Vinci, instruments, wiggly tooth.
Looks close.
Looks pretty
Looks close.
It was animals, right?
You know what? I would have said, because I would have said the second, to be honest with you.
Oh.
I think it had to, I think more of the history.
History. Oh, okay, cool. So this gives us definitely a lot to work with because we have a big variety of things here. So I know that some of you might be a little sad that the devil chickens aren't going to be in the mix, but who knows? If they were around during Leonardo da Vinci's time, that's okay. No. So we have sports, Leonardo da Vinci, instruments, wiggly tooth, and so why don't we? Should I randomly pick one? Why don't I just?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you go with
I'll
one?
go ahead and randomly pick one. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch a tiger by its toe. What is the rest of that?
If he hollers,
If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. That was like a really. I did a bad job of that. It was either piano or a wiggly tooth.
Wiggly tooth.
I think you got a wiggly tooth.
I think I hit the wiggly tooth. Now, eeny, meeny, miny, moe is. I just had a thought, and that's that you all have memorized and recited a poem before, because eeny, meeny, miny, moe, you could arguably say, hey, that's a poem. Pretty interesting thought, right? Okay, so we're going to be writing about having a wiggly tooth. Has everyone in the room before had at least one wiggly tooth? Yeah, I think so, right? Because you're all pretty old now.
We have a couple in the room right now.
Oh, you have some wiggly teeth people in the room right now. Excellent. So we have some primary sources. We can use them for sure. They know exactly what it's like. All right, so we're going to be writing a poem about a wiggly tooth. Okay, so don't worry, that's not the actual title, just a working title, Wiggly Tooth Poem. Does anyone have a care whether it should be rhyming, not rhyming? We can rhyming, okay. And so here's the big thing. Should it be should we have a narrator? That's the person who's saying the poem. Should the narrator be having a wiggly tooth? Should they be just talking about wiggly tooths in general? What should our first line look like? Any ideas?
Okay, yes. Should the person who's saying the poem have a wiggly tooth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who thinks that the person who's saying the poem should actually have a wiggly tooth in the poem?
All right,
There you
so
go.
so imagine I'm the narrator of the poem. I have a wiggly tooth, and I am writing about my wiggly tooth experience. Now, how do we make this interesting to our readers? We want to make sure that this is something that people will have a fun time reading. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about how we might do that?
Good.
Make it funny.
Make it funny, great. Humor is a really good way to entertain, to make people want to keep on reading. So let's make it funny, and we can do this by, well, how do you think we could make it funny?
Can we make it funny, Grace?
You could tell part of the poem by the two's point of view.
That's a good idea, so we could have the narrator. In fact, maybe it could be sort of a bit of a back and forth. I'll get started with some ideas. So we'll get started writing, and I will probably backspace a lot and rewrite. That's all perfectly normal. When you're writing poems, there really is no perfect first draft. I have a wiggly tooth. It's very... I have a wiggly tooth today, maybe? If we're wanting to rhyme, I suppose I should be looking for things that are easier to rhyme than tooth. I have a wiggly tooth today. It's very wiggly indeed. What? I haven't had a wiggly tooth in quite a while. What are some words that describe wiggly teeth? Can you throw out, maybe let's get 3 or 4 words.
Bloody.
Bloody, all right. So we can throw a bit of the gross in there. Bloody, what else?
Caitlin. What? Hurt.
Hurts,
Loose.
loose,
Ben.
Painful.
Painful.
Weird.
Weird.
weird. Okay, I think we have, oh yeah, one more.
Ugly.
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 Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little weird to, well, look, I'm going to use all these words, but it's a little weird to see that ugly and it's moving on in your mouth, and definitely, yeah, it's all coming back to me for sure. Also, my parents held on, and I don't know if this is just a weird thing my parents do, but they hold on to all of our wiggly teeth as like historical, I don't know, they have all of our teeth that have fallen out over the years in a little box. I say it's creepy, maybe every parent does that. Alrighty, so we can use some of these words for our description in the poem. I have a wiggly tooth today. It's ugly and it's weird. The looseness. Today, so if we went to rhyme, I have a wiggly tooth today. We don't have to rhyme with the whole today. We could just rhyme with the day part. May, hey,
It's ugly and it's weird. I have to say.
Oh, she's saying say.
All right. I have a wiggly tooth today. It's ugly and it's weird. I have to say. It wiggles and jiggles inside my mouth in a most unpleasant way. I know, so I just realized I rhymed today, say, and way, which is kind of an unusual rhyme pattern, but let's say that we're just throwing in rhymes instead of necessarily a set pattern. I have a wiggly tooth today. It's ugly and it's weird. I have to say, wiggles and jiggles inside my mouth in a most unpleasant way. How would we continue this?
Alex.
It is very bloody.
It is very bloody. Enough to make you scream. Well, not this. But it's very loose and painful. I'm in. Alright, what do we need to rhyme with here? Oh, scream. What rhymes with scream?
Rhymes with scream? Hold on. Rhymes with scream? Yes. Cream?
Ice cream.
Ice
Or dream?
dream. So, either we could have I can't even eat ice cream, or I have, how do we use dream?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I had a dream.
I had a dream. I had a dream that this tooth was finally out, but then I woke up and it's still in my mouth. Mouth doesn't quite rhyme with out. Actually, this is when you have something like out and mouth, or you have anything that kind of sounds like it rhymes, but it doesn't quite rhyme. That's called a slant rhyme, because it's not quite a full rhyme. So slant rhyme is an interesting term to know. But then I woke up and it's still in my mouth. Now, reading this, are you entertained? How do we make this more funny?
Sorry. Okay. She said more descriptive.
More descriptive. Okay.
Great.
So,
Maybe now we should return to the point of view of the.
Okay, she's saying turn to the tooth's point of view.
return to the tooth's point of view. Is it clear if I put tooth and the colon there, like tooth? Does that seem like the tooth is saying this? I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
All right. I beg your pardon, but I'm not. So the tooth is very offended, or maybe the tooth should say, maybe the tooth should be all outright angry. You called me ugly. You called me weird. How dare you?
Offend me.
How,
Offend me.
how dare you offend